encourage smart policies for building reuse and energy-efficient retrofits. David is a Tennessee native and loves bluegrass and baseball, and is on a quest to see a game in all 30 major league baseball stadiums. I'm grateful David Brown and his Denver, Colorado associate Jim Lindberg, who I introduced earlier, who's Senior Director of Preservation Green Labs, are with us today. So please welcome our wonderful speaker, David Brown. Thank you.
Are we working yet? There we go, great. Henry, thank you very much. It's really an honor to be here, and to be here with so many preservation leaders from here in Louisville. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to speak to the members of this club today because of all that you do every day to make this city a better place in which to live. You've been working for those who need a helping hand for over 100 years, and it really shows in the community, and I'm just grateful for all that you do and applaud you for that work. When I was growing up in Tennessee, my grandmother, when she wanted me to do something, would say to me, make yourself useful as well as ornamental. And I was looking at the four-way test. I think you could probably add that as a fifth test. Are you being useful as well as ornamental? But the work you do in this club and all you do in Louisville and the greater Louisville area says a great deal about this community and the heart of Louisville, and I just thank you for having me here today and what you're doing. In a similar fashion, I believe the places that we choose to preserve here in Louisville and around the country tell us a great deal about who we are as a people. They tell us about what we value and the stories that we want to share together. These places speak of the type of economy and jobs, the type of future that we want for our citizens. Old places embody our identity, both our personal identity as well as our civic identity. Old places also create a sense of continuity and variety that helps people feel more balanced, stable, and healthy. Louisville's Christy Brown has been a national leader in linking the preservation of older and historic buildings with healthy communities, and we're very pleased to be working with Christy here in this city. But it's really no longer enough just to save the places that we value. We also have to sustain them, and we have to weave them into the tapestry of the future of our communities. The Knight Foundation's Soul of the Communities project found that social offerings, openness, or how welcoming a place is, and physical beauty perform key roles in attracting people to a place. In fact, those things don't just attract people to a community, but they help them form an attachment to that place. And it turns out that attachment to a community is an important indicator of how economically successful a community will be. Let me repeat that because I think it's important. Attachment to a community by its residents is an important indicator of how economically successful a community will be. Just as actively engaged employees are more productive and committed to the success of their businesses and organizations, highly attached residents are more likely to actively contribute to a community's growth. So I want to focus today on why older and historic buildings can play an especially meaningful role in helping form these attachments, which are so important to Louisville's economic vitality and sustainability. Economic vitality is directly linked to progress. But wait, I can hear you saying it. Aren't preservationists those people who are against progress? Aren't you the people who don't want anything to change? Well, contrary to public perception, change is constant and important to our work as preservationists. Buildings, landscapes, neighborhoods, cities, they all change over time. Progress is key to our work because successful preservation helps make time a continuum. Preservationists are not here just to stop change or to keep things as they are, but we work as part of a community to help manage change, to envision a future instead of just accepting what will happen if we don't do anything. The fact is that preservation has been at the heart of the renewal of many American communities over the past 30 years. Which brings me to Louisville. As Henry mentioned, the National Trust has embarked on a long-term project to utilize Louisville as an urban laboratory for the integration of preservation, development, and sustainability. We call this work our Heart of Louisville National Treasure Campaign. And the National Trust, the organization that I work for, has a strong track record to bring to this work. First, through Main Street America, we have 35 years of experience in preservation-based grassroots economic development, supported by a national network of more than 2,000 communities, and as well, tools that have been tested all across the nation in these communities. We bring capital and investment experience through our 15-year-old National Trust Community Investment Corporation, where the trust subsidiary has leveraged $3.6 billion in total rehabilitation development in more than 120 projects all across the nation. And finally, for the past 7 years, our Preservation Green Lab has provided expertise in research and application of new tools in sustainability and preservation policy, working in large and mid-sized cities, in hot and cold markets all across the country. Here in Louisville, the Trust team works with local partners from the preservation and development community, the real estate sector, academia, and Metro Louisville. Together, we want to recast and expand the definition of preservation so that we can see that preservation is not an end unto itself, but a powerful and effective tool to reach an economically stronger, diverse, and sustainable future. Now, when thinking of preservation, many see a narrow set of interests focused on architecture. But as Herbert Muskamp, former architecture critic for the New York Times, said, a building does not have to be an important work of architecture to become a first-rate landmark. Landmarks are not created by architects. They are fashioned by those who encounter them after they are built. Muskamp said, the essential feature of a landmark is not its design, but the place it holds in a city's memory. Now, Americans really care about the loss of places they love, the places that provide them with emotional resonance and with a sense of continuity. Here in Louisville, we can choose to focus preservation on people. Fred Kent, who is the founder of Project for Public Spaces, has said that if you plan cities for cars and traffic, you're going to get cars and traffic. If you plan cities for places and people, you'll get places and people. Preservationists have intuitively understood this and the important role that older buildings and landscapes and development patterns play not only in building continuity, but in supporting community vitality, social diversity, and small business development. Jane Jacobs said this in 1961 when she noted that cities need old buildings so badly it's probably impossible for vigorous streets and districts to grow without them. And through the research of our Preservation Green Lab, which Jim Lindbergh, my colleague, heads, we are now able to empirically show just how right Jane Jacobs was. Using a trove of newly available data, spatial statistical analysis, layered citywide maps, and in-depth neighborhood case studies, our work has found strong statistical connections between the unique architectural characteristics of older urban blocks and economically vibrant and socially diverse neighborhoods. A 2014 National Trust study entitled Older, Smaller, Better begins to make this case by highlighting preservation's key role in economic vitality and the intensity of human activity. We found in this study that neighborhoods made up of a diverse mix of older and newer buildings support the local economy with a high percentage of new businesses as well as women and minority-owned businesses. Neighborhoods with a mix of older and new buildings are not only more diverse in age, race, and income, but they also have a hidden density, more people and businesses per square foot than areas with just new buildings. They are far more walkable, meaning healthier residents and a more sustainable environment. They are In a word, communities. Historic buildings help to forge desirable, viable neighborhoods that attract diverse residents, young professionals, entrepreneurs, and visitors who contribute to the city's health and vitality. I want to drill down on that last point. Our research shows that young people love old buildings. America's cities are magnets for young people, and these individuals are voting with their feet to live, work, and play in older and historic neighborhoods. The National Trust recently examined data from 5 major cities around the country, and we found that up to 90% of the hip bars and restaurants in those communities were located in older buildings. We found that nightlife is most alive on streets with a diverse range of historic buildings. Now, how do we know this? Well, it's scary what's out there. On Fridays at 10 p.m., there's significantly greater cell phone activity in neighborhoods with mixed vintage buildings than neighborhoods with new buildings alone. We know where you're calling from. We're bringing this data analysis to Louisville by first developing a baseline of regional land use patterns, demographic trends, and economic opportunities to assist local decision making and enable future measurement of community performance over time. The Green Lab's mapping and analysis in Louisville is already showing the importance of the urban core to the city's future. Early indications from our research suggest that Louisville's best restaurants, bars, yoga studios, stores are also located in areas with a strong and diverse mix of old and new buildings. As we gather this data, we will collaborate with our public and private partners and stakeholders to identify local barriers to reuse. Why aren't buildings being reused? And we'll recommend solutions to support greater levels of building reuse and improve community performance. It's very important to us that citizens of Louisville be part of this process, supporting preservation's role in creating a vibrant and sustainable city. To engage them, we've got plans to highlight opportunities for sustainable creative building use citywide. Thankfully, Louisville has a strong collection of developers, citizens activists, organizations, and visionary leaders who are playing a crucial role in transforming Louisville from just another hollow suburban-focused city to a city with an accelerating downtown renaissance, to use the language of one of your local media outlets. People like Bill Whalen and the City Properties Group, using a formula that our Preservation Green Lab highlights in the Older, Smaller, Better report, Bill and his team are making this renewal possible by creatively reusing historic buildings and building new ones to fill gaps left by the destructive dogma of the 1950s and 1960s urban renewal. They're doing it with projects such as the rehabilitation of the 1885 Guthrie Coke building, with its 11-foot ceilings, light wells, and windows designed for optimal cross ventilation, amenities that attract a wide range of tenants. And new capital and new development is also helping revitalize the urban core in areas such as Lousivlle. Steve Michaels' Hudson Holdings team is investing in landmarks such as the Starks Building and the Republic Building. And the National Trust, through its America Saves program and a partnership with the New Lousivlle Sustainability District, is helping owners in that community find a way to adopt old buildings for local entrepreneurs, small businesses, and restaurants while lowering energy cost. This morning I had the chance to tour the new old headquarters of Genscape with Andy Edwards. If you aren't familiar with Genscape, it's a Louisville company that monitors energy and commodity markets all over the world. I love what their CEO, Matthew Berkeley, has been quoted as saying, "As a company, we believe in rebuilding and restoring historic structures." The smart young talent that Genscape seeks appreciates the character, craftsmanship, and neighborhood feel that places such as the Dairy in Old Louisville and the housing in neighborhoods such as Germantown have to offer. If you haven't been to the Genscape space, do yourself a favor and go and find out a way to get a tour. And if you're really good, get Annie to give you the tour, and you will come away inspired. The historic structures in these distinctive neighborhoods are not just a reflection of Louisville's past. They are assets that can be leveraged to strengthen the city's economic future. Time and again in our preservation work, we've seen that America's most healthy and dynamic cities are those that maximize the power and potential of historic buildings to generate economic growth and foster a higher quality of life. And as a mid-sized city with a legacy of historic buildings, including the largest collection of Victorian-era homes in the country, Lousivlle is poised to become a national leader in smart preservation-based development. Preservation development comes in many forms, and yet it invariably supports local economies in ways where non-sustainable development doesn't. The public sector has recognized this fact over the past 35 years by providing federal tax incentives for the rehabilitation of older and historic buildings. In the past 35 years, independent studies have shown that the federal historic rehabilitation tax credits have been used nationwide to preserve more than 40,000 buildings, brought a private sector investment that exceeds $117 billion, and this is the most important statistic, generates $1.27 in tax revenue for every $1 invested by the federal government. Let me say that again, I heard a wow. How many government programs do you know that for every dollar you put in, the government gets back in tax revenue $1.27? Not very many. It's really impressive. In the last 13 years here in Kentucky, we've seen 265 buildings rehabilitated at an investment of $356 million from the private sector. Historic tax credits are often used on buildings that bring new partners on the ground, entrepreneurs, restaurateurs, because of the attraction of historic places. And while the credits are sometimes faulted as too costly to implement, thousands of developers have found them to be a useful source of capital to make difficult projects possible. They're not the only solution, but they're an important solution. Since 2005, the state of Kentucky has also invested in its historic buildings, and I'm excited that there's currently an effort underway to expand the state historic tax credit and make more capital available to put underutilized or vacant buildings back into productive use. Wherever capital comes from, be it a national source, such as the National Trust Community Investment Corporation, or a local source, we need to encourage capital with a vision. More capital with a vision for the future that goes beyond suburban sprawl and non-sustainable development. We need capital that includes a long-term approach to wealth creation. We need local capital that understands the needs of the community and isn't just in it for the quick buck. In other words, we need capital that supports preservation-based development, that understands how rich and vital older and historic buildings catalyze a more vibrant future for our communities. With the rise in suburban and auto-centric development from the 1950s, we've now raised really a couple of generations of citizens who have no idea what a wonderful and enriching place a city or a town can be. During that time period, we weren't building communities. And unfortunately, we have many citizens who now feel like they don't have a home. And yet, young people who lived in those disconnected places are leading the way back to places that work, places that have both a history and a future. Environmental psychologists are helping us to understand that old places provide people with a sense of being part of a continuum that's necessary for them to be psychologically and emotionally healthy, a continuous city, if you will. Environmental psychologist Colin Ellard shared a recent study where he characterized the mood of people outside a new blank-walled megastore in Manhattan as bored and unhappy. He noted an immediate transformation in behavior, however, when the same subjects moved less than a block away to an older strip of restaurants and stores with lots of open doors and windows. They felt lively and engaged. They didn't want to leave. Urban planner Justin Hollander suggests that this helps explain why we can effortlessly have a good time in many older European cities, even though we don't understand the native language. These places feed our brain what it loves to see when we walk: rich detail, complex patterns, symmetrical ornamentation, and lots of faces. Smart development that includes saving historic places has helped fuel growth all across America for the past 30 years. Let's keep it in the forefront here in Lousivlle as we work to ensure a vital, sustainable Lousivlle for the future. I think we have the opportunity together to make preservation relevant in shaping the future of this community. By embracing preservation, progress, and people, we may find ourselves here in Louisville in the same situation as those who follow Mark Twain's advice about always telling the truth. It will amaze your friends and confound your enemies. Here's to Louisville's amazing future. Thank you very much.
David, thank you. We're going to open up the mics. I'm sure people have questions that they'd like to ask. Let me start off with a question. Downtown, I mean, there's so much going on. I mean, Bardstown Road, they're building that brewery. There's Portland, there's downtown, there's Nulu. Are you seeing one particular area of the city that's going crazier than the other? It just seems like there's stuff everywhere.
You know, Greg, that's a great question. And we're seeing it in a number of different places. And I think that's what's important. All of those places you mentioned are places that have a mix of older and newer buildings. And so it doesn't necessarily have to happen in what we think of as traditional historic districts, but it's happening in places where you have the right mix of amenities and the right mix of buildings and where people are excited about being. So we're seeing it across the board.
Great, fantastic.
Thank you very much for coming here and giving your excellent presentation. My question relates to where preservation is for most of us who aren't professionally involved, unlike our great friend Bill Whalen,
Right.
but who kind of observe from the sidelines. We're generally supportive. I think most people agree with the comments that you made today in a general matter. The rubber meets the road, however, when you get these projects that become controversial. For example, most recently we had and I'm sure you're familiar with this, the old Lousivlle Water Company building,
right.
and then I remember years ago the beautiful old Will Sales building we had at Liberty and 4th Street. And my question is, for the average citizen out there, how do you relate to that in terms of, are you saying, any preservation issue, you got to be on the preservationist side or the other side? Or how do we think about that in a logical way that says, I want to get involved, I want to help save this, or it's not important enough to me?
That's a great question. And I think the water building project that you talked about is a great example. This is one where we weren't able to save the buildings, but I think the charrette process that we helped facilitate showed that there's a great deal of interest and expertise in this community. And I think what as preservationists we always want to do is try and be at the table and part of those conversations. It doesn't necessarily have to be an us versus them conversation at all times. And I think as the city especially is going through the update of its comprehensive plan, thinking about what type of community Louisville wants is going to be as important to thinking about how we save individual buildings. If you look at where cities are thriving today, it's where they have walkable neighborhoods, it's where they have a mix of old and new buildings, and that's the type of conversation that needs to take place. So I think what we're trying to do is identify places where investment, both private and public, and thinking about new tools to help make that kind of investment help our cities grow is what we're focused on here in Louisville and around the country today. So one of the things we're looking at is what are the new tools that need to be put into place because many of the old tools in preservation were created to respond to urban renewal. We've got a different kind of set of issues today that we're dealing with.
Sydney?
Hi, thanks. I'm Sydney Gates. I'm an architect, but my master's was in health administration. Mm-hmm. So my research has been more about how mixed use and small development decreases obesity. And there's a lot of research that shows the infrastructure that's built around pedestrians as well as a smaller scale is really influential to stopping obesity. Do you all have any background on, you talk about health, and I think about that economically, but from a physical aspect for people?
You're exactly right, and we found the same things in research that we've looked at There really is a relationship between the types of communities that I think many of us grew up in and we'd like and we're seeing coming back, and healthy communities and places where people walk instead of always have to get into a car to go from, to go get a loaf of bread or go get a beer at the bar. And so, if you're out and looking for communities that are healthy, you find places where things are compact. There's a mix of building types, and the research is really growing in that area. So thanks for raising that, and thanks for the work that you're doing.
Go ahead.
Some of you in the audience are old enough to remember that about 45 years ago, just post-urban renewal, when the devastation was prevalent, you could see it everywhere, the community adopted an attitude, the leadership in the community: we want to make Louisville better, but not bigger, and that there was a choice. You may recall that or know about it. The cities around us have done a tremendous job in growth. Nashville, Memphis, in your state. I personally wouldn't choose to live in either one of those cities compared to Louisville. Louisville is a quality place to live. But the cities around us, Atlanta, St. Louis, Indianapolis, etc., Cincinnati, which was always larger, and so was St. Louis, they have grown. Traffic has grown. Everything has grown. There's got to be a way for us to take the community of being better, and it is better. It is a fine city. Example: when I was in Nashville recently, we went to the football game in kind of a mediocre football stadium. Walked across where the symphony orchestra plays, and their highlight was Diana. Somebody was coming to sing. I mean, it's a different culture. It's a different quality, and I love the quality we have here. What do we do? What do we do to merge, not just have a great preservation, not just have people who are bringing businesses here, solicited and unsolicited? How do we merge those two, growth and preservation, to develop the community as it is, but comfortably larger within their constraints?
I couldn't agree more with your characterization of Nashville, which I grew up right outside of Nashville, and I still go back several times a year because my father still lives in Murfreesboro, which is 30 miles south. When I grew up in Murfreesboro, there was a division between Murfreesboro and Nashville. Now, you described it perfectly. They've grown so much that the traffic is horrendous. And I think one of the real problems with a place like the growth that we see in a place like Nashville is that's not really sustainable growth. And I think what Louisville can do, and focusing on how do we use the older buildings that are an asset here, how do we use that as a way to build sustainable growth as opposed to growth at any cost? And those are things that, we all have, we're all part of the conversation about that. And what does that mean? But I do think that as in the research that we're doing and finding, and in the places that really are working, using the assets that are in place, building within the boundaries that we have instead of keep pushing it out to the suburbs and beyond the exurbs, will make for a much more sustainable growth over time. And I agree completely. I think that is what you should be striving for in a place like Louisville.
Is there an effort to do so?
I think there's a lot of conversation happening in the city right now in Louisville around what's the type of growth that we want to see happen. When you look at Louisville, I've been to Louisville a number of times, but I was really struck by it this time. When you come into town, so much of the traffic infrastructure was built to get people out of town. And you know what? It doesn't really work because you still have a big traffic problem in the middle of the afternoon and in the morning as well. But it goes back to that point I made. If you design buildings for cars and traffic, you're going to get cars and traffic. And I think what Louisville needs to start doing is thinking about places and people, and that's where I think you'll succeed.
Is there an effort to form a community plan?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Is there an effort to form some form of community plan?
Well, the city, right, Metro Louisville is actually, we were meeting with them earlier today. They're in the process of beginning thinking about what the comprehensive plan update will be. And there are groups that are pulling groups together, and we are, as part of our work here in Louisville, also bringing people together for just those kind of conversations.
Greg?
Hey, David, thank you for coming to Louisville and kind of sharing this vision and how we can, whatever we can do to help save our historic buildings. I just want to make two comments. My name is Greg Heitzman. I'm a retired president at Louisville Water Company, and Water Company's been in the headlines a lot with the building. 2 points I want to make so everybody's aware is, although we weren't able to save the building per se, the entire front facade has been saved, and it will be essentially, it's in good hands and good storage. Everything is documented, and it will be rebuilt in an appropriate location at some future point to be determined by the water company and the mayor. Second thing is, we can't leave here, I don't think, without making a comment, and I want to thank Bill Whalen. Bill's right up here in the front. Wave your hand, Bill. Bill is like the father, from my perspective, of investing in Louisville many years ago when other folks wouldn't. And I recall, Bill, you remember when we wanted to do the water tower, and he cleverly came to us, and we, about 8-10 years ago, renovated the historic water tower, and he was able to get us a tax credit. And I remember saying, well, Louisville Water Company is tax exempt. And he brought this idea that those tax credits are available to private entities, and I think we got like 85 cents on the dollar. And many folks here locally run local businesses, so there's an opportunity to be able to partner. I think at that time, David Heitzman and Stockyards Bank, I think, secured that. So really, I'm going to lead a round of applause for Bill for all the work he's done here. You know, from whether it's the Henry Clay building, the water tower, the list goes on. So thank you, Bill, very much. And David, thank you for coming and sharing the vision, the opportunity for Louisville that we've got.
Well, thank you.
Rick?
I'm Rick Harded, retired, and looking toward downsizing, hopefully into a high-rise apartment one of these years in a walkable neighborhood. But it seems to me one of the key problems about maybe coming downtown to do that is finding a grocery store in a walkable neighborhood. Mm-hmm. Grocery stores, maybe I'm wrong, they seem to think that they need large parking areas in order to serve people. Have other cities solved that problem of getting good, relatively inexpensive grocery stores in high-density areas?
Sure, they have. And what you're talking about is one of the great things about preservation and reuse of old buildings especially. What we want to do is allow our citizens to age in place. Now, my 90-year-old father just had to leave his house, which for many years we lived on Main Street in Murfreesboro, and he went to a retirement community, and he has to get in a car to go anywhere from that space. Where he lived, he could do all of the things that he used to do, and he could walk there, especially after we took his car away. So, that's what your kids do to you. Be ready for that. But you're exactly right. And many grocery stores have been designed on the suburban model. You've got to have these big parking spaces. But when you look at places that have a lot of downtown residents, and I think that's another thing that in Louisville could really benefit, is by more housing downtown, create more demand, that then those people don't need cars because they don't really have them. They're walking. And oftentimes parking can be put underground. That's how it's done in a number of places in the Washington, D.C. area for parking, for grocery stores. And it works just fine. Also, I think we probably, many of our cities call for too much parking for what we need in those communities, in those businesses, and we're seeing that. So it's the old thing, we plan for parking for the day after Thanksgiving, and that's one day a year, and you really don't need that many parking spaces. And one of the great things that we've been seeing in a number of communities is that as people rehabilitate buildings, their parking requirements are actually removed. It's a way of incentivizing rehabilitation, and we're finding that works fine. We've made parking the guide in many of our central business districts, and the cars, where we really should be thinking about the people and the people who want to walk and be able to go and get their groceries, and go to get their dry cleaning, go to church, do all those things that we all do, and they want to do it and be able to walk and age in place. And I thank you for raising that, because it's really important. And I think Louisville has the opportunity to do that, but it's going to take some changing in policies and some enlightened investors.
David, thank you so much for speaking with us today. What a great presentation.